I've pretty much tried every productivity system out there, and after years of experimentation, I've distilled down my workflow to three main principles. This is a setup that you can use with pretty much any app or tool you're already using, and it'll help you stay a lot more focused and prioritized throughout your week. Most people plan by day and then give up on Wednesday, but when you switch to planning your schedule by week, it actually gives you a lot more breathing room. This is a system that has worked for me throughout the years, whether I was managing design teams or acting as an individual contributor, and it's worked across multiple tools and job titles. So, regardless of what tools you're using, this is how you can plan your week so you actually get stuff done. Let's start by looking at the three core principles. First is keep everything consolidated. Don't try and use multiple apps for the same purpose. It'll be a lot easier for you every day if you have one app for your notes and one app for your tasks. Number two is make it easy to capture. You want to have a dedicated space that you can use as a scratch pad for any thoughts or just to jot down some notes during a meeting, but you also want to be able to use shortcuts and things like quick entry to quickly capture to-dos. Number three is to plan weekly and then prioritize daily. These are actually two separate headspaces you're going to be in. So we want to set up our whole week for success. And then each morning, we're going to just pick one of those main things to focus on for that day. The idea is that you're doing all the prep work up front, and then you're just choosing from a prepped list rather than having to start from scratch every morning. So let's take a look at task management. I use an app called Things 3. It's been working for me really well for almost 3 years now. And if you're someone who is mostly just handling your own to-dos, you're not really sharing with a team or other people, it works very, very well. I did a whole video comparing different to-do apps and why I chose Things 3, which you can check out here. But the main gist is that it is just minimal and helps you stay focused on the actual work. There's no extra gimmicks or other tools that you can get distracted by. It's really just a place to keep things organized. The main way you organize your lists is by creating either an area or a project. So if you're familiar with the para method, this should feel really natural. The other thing I really love about it is this today view. So the today view is pretty self-explanatory. Any tasks that you add today are going to show up on this list. Now, I pretty much spend 95% of my time in this today view. So this is just going to show you all of the tasks that you have set for today. And I really love this because if you don't finish a task for that day, then it just rolls over to the next one. If you do have specific deadlines, then you can set reminders and actually set a deadline so that it'll flag it if it goes over. But if you don't set that up, then it doesn't punish you or yell at you that you didn't get things done, and you can just check it off the next day. So the way I've adapted this is I actually just use the today view as my week view. So I set everything as due today on a Monday morning, and then if I do have specific due dates, that's when I'll add a deadline. So I have a couple areas and projects here. The thing that has always worked for me in terms of my 9 to 5 is just having one area for all of my business aspects. So I have a couple projects in here. One will be admin and side quests. And then I pretty much have a project for each of the teams that I'm on. So admin is for things like checking email, submitting expenses, just some of that extra maintenance work you have to do. Side quests are going to be kind of optional, fun explorations that I have for work. It could even be helping out a coworker with something on the side, but not really part of my day-to-day. And currently I'm on 3 separate teams, and so I have all of the tasks for that team in that dedicated project. I found that this setup has worked tremendously well because if you start adding a project for any actual project at work, you're now tying the completion of that project to the success at work, which is not controlled by you. And so rather than actually managing projects in here, they're almost like managing sub areas. And this is what's worked really well over the years, no matter where I've worked or what teams I've been on. Recently, I've been using tags at my new job to indicate where those projects are. So if it is actually like a dedicated project we're working on as a team, then I will tag that rather than having to enter what that project is in every single task. Outside of work, I have a couple areas here. So life admin is going to be for errands. It could be paying the bills. I might have projects under here like tax season is actually a reoccurring project I've set up in things. So I have a whole checklist in there that I go through every year. So every January it rolls around as a recurring yearly project. So that's a nice way to group things together for kind of just that administrative stuff. Personal is just a nice catch-all for anything that I want to remind myself to do that is generally not time sensitive. I rarely have projects in here, but one example would be planning Valentine's Day. So I had a couple to dos in there to like research restaurants and to write a letter and just like some of those simple tasks just so I didn't forget. And then I could actually close that up as a project. But for the most part, I'm pretty much just using the area and adding tasks in there. Labs is just a fun catch all area for any experimentation I'm doing, especially in the age of vibe coding. I feel like I come up with an idea every single weekend. So I'm always coming up with different projects and then creating them in here and checking them off. But it's nice to keep that separate from those other areas. And then finally, I have a vlog area, and that's for all of the videos I put here on YouTube. So the way that I plan everything is actually just dumping ideas into this area. And then once I'm actually focused on that video, like this one today, I'll generally convert that to a project. So to show you what that looks like, I have this weekly planning workflow. That's just the original idea I came up with and the original notes that I put in. It's nothing crazy. I'll usually just jot down my thoughts to remind myself for later. And then when I do sit down to plan it out, I'll actually build out the full outline in my notes app. So now that I've actually built out the outline, you can actually see my notes here on the left. I'll now go back into things and I can actually convert to a project. So it's going to ask if I want to convert, and then you'll see that come in as a full item underneath vlog. And now that I actually have a title for this, it's going to be how to plan your week. And then I don't really use the notes anymore. That is one thing about things. You can actually have a notes section in a project or an area. If I do put something in here, it's actually just going to be the link to the Bear note. So I use all my notes in Bear, and then I can come up to the top and hit copy link and just paste that in there. And then from here, I like to break down all the different stages of building a video. Now, every video has different amount of work when it comes to editing. In my last one, I had a ton of B-roll that I wanted to shoot. And so I actually set a separate task for each of the B-roll ideas I wanted. And then I might add another to-do to say like edit in B-roll. Then we have publish and schedule. So that is to upload to YouTube, set a publish date, and then also to draft posts for threads and X and all of that good stuff. But now if I actually come up to the top of the project, I can set that when date to today. So now that I've added that project, you'll actually see that come in as a project. It's not listing every single task, and that's what I really like is when you have bigger bodies of work, you don't want to see every single thing sometimes when you're trying to get this bird's eye view. So same thing with tax season, there's 9 to-dos I need to have in there. I don't need to see 16 action items for these more personal tasks when I'm jumping in and out for work throughout the week. While I'm obviously focused on keeping work and personal all planned from the same space, you'll see that I'm very much prioritizing productivity for my 9 to 5 because that's generally where all of the action items are coming in and out. And most stuff with personal is not time sensitive. It can be pushed to later in the week, or it is just usually a smaller task. So it doesn't need to take up as much space. One way that I actually have solved that too in things is by leveraging the this evening view. So within the today view, you have all of your areas up here, and you'll see that it lists the heading for an area and then all the tasks in there. But it also has a section at the bottom called this evening. So if I actually right click on the project and I set when, I can either set it to today or this evening. And if I set it to this evening, it just pushes it down. So what I've done is set up an automation in Apple Shortcuts that looks at pretty much any non-work related task in things, and it automatically sets it to this evening every single morning. I really wish I could schedule this to this evening automatically when it comes to scheduling to-dos and things. Unfortunately, that's not a feature in here, so I have to automate it. But once you set up that automation once, you never have to come back. And so every morning, all of my personal stuff is automatically grouped to the bottom, and then work stuff operates up here. Obviously, it's blank because I'm just filming this video and it's a Sunday. But the way that it typically works for me is that I'll just go through each of these projects and look over different ideas that I have. So if I don't have anything that's time sensitive, I won't set a when date. That's what it's called in things. And that way it just comes in here, and I can always come back and add them kind of like a backlog. There's generally not a lot in here, and that's what this little progress indicator shows, is that there's actually not many outstanding tasks. And for me, that's actually a really good sign to start the week with a pretty low list on my backlog. Generally, the way my work operates in the product design world is that I'm working with product managers, engineers, and a whole bunch of other folks. So my to do list sometimes gets bigger at the end of the week than it does at the start, which means that I'm trying to build in capacity on a Monday. But based on what I do know for the week and how last week wrapped up, I'll try and write some to dos in here as kind of my main goals and know that I need to leave in some room as stuff comes up. So I just created a bunch of dummy tasks for the sake of showing you how those projects come in. So each project is its own section here. And then at the bottom, we have all of the evening tasks grouped, which is just for personal. And generally, what I like to do is use tags for those projects, like I said. And if I do tag any of these, you'll see that it comes up with a tab at the top of the screen. So I can actually toggle over to that and just see those tasks still in the today view. But that's really nice to kind of switch between here's a bird's eye view, and then maybe I'm in a meeting or talking to someone about that project. I can actually just switch over and then see those tasks there. I also have a tag for waiting. This is if maybe I'm waiting on a customer or a teammate for feedback, then I can actually switch over to those just to kind of use it as follow-ups. I've tried using tags in the past for things like priority and all that stuff, but it honestly just got too much to handle because it's mostly just for me. And generally when I'm adding tasks, it's really, really quick using the quick entry, and I don't have time to fill all that out. Recently, I've been keeping all of my completed tasks in the same view. And I really like this because you can actually feel like you're getting momentum as you check things off throughout the day and throughout the week. So this is a setting inside of things. If you go over to the general tab where it says move completed items to logbook, you can have it just be moved immediately. So as soon as you check it off, it just disappears. You can have it done at the end of the day or just set it to manual. And so recently I've had it set on manual, and I use it to kind of feel like I'm making more progress throughout the week. So on Monday, I may get these 3 things done. Tuesday, I get this stuff. And I actually found it's like a little dopamine hit to look at this throughout the week and say, like, I've actually checked off a lot of these tasks. I'm making a ton of progress. Rather than just kind of getting more white space, it feels a little bit more celebratory. Then on a Friday at the end of the workday, I'll just jump in here and log everything. And that's typically just to clear out all of my work tasks. And then I only go into the weekend with my personal stuff. If I do have outstanding work tasks, I just set it to be due the following Monday so I don't see it on a Saturday or Sunday. I'll also include a link down below to that Apple shortcut that automatically organizes my personal tasks under this evening. That way, if you are a Things user, you don't have to set it up from scratch. Next, let's take a look at my note-taking setup. I use an app called Bear, and admittedly, this is something that has changed quite a lot over the years. I've bounced between using things like Notion, Apple Notes, Craft, Obsidian, kind of in this never-ending quest to build a second brain and just kind of see how different note-taking apps work. One of the reasons I think I struggled, though, is because I was trying to set up something that would work for my job, for my personal, for basically a huge catch-all for all the note-taking in my life. And what I realized is that it's really best to use whatever your company uses for work and then figure out whatever works for your personal notes. If they are the same space, that's great, but I just cannot use Notion for all of my personal stuff. I find it way too complicated. And for a lot of the stuff I'm doing these days with AI, I really want markdown formatted notes, and that's where Bear really works well. About 90% of my notes are all in Bear. I really love how minimalist it is, and it plays really nice with things, as you saw, kind of copying the links between projects and notes that way. So generally what I do in Bear is I set up one dedicated note for the entire week. So what it'll look like is I'll go ahead and create a new note, and I'll switch to this dedicated view. So week of, and then I'll just put whatever the Monday date is. I'm going to assign this to my business tag, because this is mostly a work note, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I have 3 sections in here. So the first is just going to be a scratch pad. And then the second is going to be my log. And I actually like to have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, because this is where I do my daily review at the end. And then finally, I have a goals section. And so the way that this flows out throughout the week is that I actually start in my goals section and I just list out all of those key tasks that we organized in things, And then I'll also just look over my meetings for the week that are coming up or any conversations I've had, notes that I have in Notion for work with colleagues. And I'll just kind of distill that over the next 10, 20 minutes into my key focus areas for the week. So by the end of the week this Friday, I'd love for all of these main things to be done. This is actually different from all of my tasks because this is actually just like the main things and impact that I want to have over the week. That way I don't feel like I have to keep this in sync with what's in things. These are kind of just like setting my intentions for the week. And then I'll mostly just look at this at the end when I'm doing my reflection. The log section, which I talked about in my last video, is just where I do a brain dump at the end of the workday. I literally turn on Whisper and I just talk through a bunch of different things, and that's just kind of how I transcribe it all. It captures it really nicely. At the end of the week, I'll just highlight all of this, copy it into something like Claude, and ask it to just give me a really concise summary. And that's usually what I'll put into like Slack if I'm sharing with teammates and stuff like that. And then finally, which we talked about as one of the core principles, I have to have a dedicated scratch pad. The scratch pad is really helpful just to jot down whatever thoughts and ideas you have in the moment. So I could be in a meeting and just need to quickly write down something someone said. If I'm trying to think through something before I jump into something like Claude or ChatGPT, I like to outline my process first. I actually did this last week, which you can check out here. I was brainstorming different ideas for how we organize our design projects in Notion. And so I just kind of quickly articulated the pain point, some ideas, and then this was kind of an outline I could put into Claude and then get some ideas from that. I probably cycle through this section 3 or 4 times a day, just randomly jotting things down, and I almost always clear it by the end of the day. And if I don't get around to it, I try and go find some place to put it where I'll be able to access it later. So generally that looks like opening up Notion and putting it in our team notes section where other people can access it. The final thing, which I almost forgot in Bear, is actually setting the today's focus. This is a newer thing I've started because I do use the today view in things for the whole week. I actually needed a place just to dump like my intention and priority for that specific day. So on a Monday, I'll just write down, maybe it is weekly planning if I don't have anything big. But generally by the end of Monday, I already have Tuesday's goal written down and then so on and so on. And it just helps me really remember what the most important thing is for that day. If I can't get anything else done, that's what I need to accomplish. But for the most part, it's just a quick place to brain dump. Now, like I said, this is all very work focused. And the main reason for that is I just don't take a lot of notes in my personal life throughout the week. Note taking for me outside of work typically looks like writing video scripts. Sometimes it's a blog article, but that's going to be a separate note that isn't really tied to my weekly planning, and I don't feel a need to highlight it here. Every now and then I might go like watch a YouTube video or meet with a colleague that isn't necessarily work related, but it's just like an interesting conversation. And I'll actually create like a linked note in here in Bear. So I can actually just hit like a double bracket and say like coffee with so-and-so. And then that can be turned into a note where I'll go put all my notes in there. But I very rarely put any important notes in this main week note because it's really just meant to be a quick capture and then link out to the right place. So there you have it. That is my task management and note taking system for every week. That's how I plan out all my tasks and plan out all my goals, my activity log, and kind of just brainstorm as I go throughout my week. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you realize that you don't need a fancy, automated, or complicated system. Definitely use technology where it helps you, but there is something to be said about taking 20, 30 minutes at the start of your week just for yourself to actually think through what it is you want. All of this could be done on pen and paper. You could have a notebook open with your tasks on the left and your notes on the right. So I hope this walkthrough helps you in some way. I'd love to know what tools and systems you're using today to help you stay organized when you're planning your week. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.